December 1944. Belgium. The Battle of the Bulge. Everything was chaos. The Germans had punched through the Allied lines with a force nobody had predicted. Patton's Third Army was being redirected, turned 90 degrees north in one of the most audacious military pivots in history. Men, machines, supplies, everything moving at once. In the middle of all of it, Patton was supposed to be at a forward command post outside Bastogne at 1400 hours. He never arrived, not because of the weather, not because of the roads, because of a phone call, a changed route, and a German artillery strike that hit the original position at 1402 hours. The post was destroyed. 3 men were killed. Patton had been rerouted 4 minutes before impact. Nobody thought much of it at the time. War was full of near misses. Men survived by margins too thin to measure every day. But 3 years later, when the archive teams were going through captured German artillery records, a researcher found something that didn't fit. The strike that had nearly killed Patton had not been aimed at the command post. The artillery unit had been ordered to target a different position entirely. Someone had made an error. Or someone had not made an error at all. It took 18 months of investigation to find out which. This is what they found. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that history almost missed entirely. The German artillery unit responsible for the December 1944 strike was the 276th Volksgrenadier Division's support battalion. By the time the archive investigators reached them in 1947, most of the unit had been discharged and dispersed across post-war Germany. The battery commander for that particular strike had been an Unteroffizier named Heinrich Vogel, 31 years old, from a small town outside Leipzig, former mathematics teacher, conscripted in 1942. The investigators found him running a small accounting practice in his hometown. He agreed to an interview immediately without hesitation. He seemed unsurprised to be found. He was shown the original fire order and the recorded point of impact. 2 different locations, a significant discrepancy. He looked at both documents carefully. He did not deny the discrepancy. He said, "Yes, that is correct." The investigator said, "Can you explain the difference?" Vogel said, "I can." He explained it in the way a former mathematics teacher explains anything. Precisely, methodically, without embellishment. He had received the fire order at 1340 hours. The target coordinates were for the forward command post. He had looked at those coordinates and done what he always did, checked them against his maps, verified the surrounding terrain, assessed the likely casualties. The coordinates were accurate. The target was military. The order was legitimate. He had given a different order. The investigator said, "Why?" Vogel was quiet for a moment. Not long. He had been sitting with this question for 3 years and had his answer prepared. He said, "I had a runner at my position that morning. A young private from the infantry, 17 years old, carrying messages between units. While he was waiting for my reply to send back, he sat down next to my position and ate his lunch. He paused. He said, he had a photograph. He was looking at it while he ate. A woman and 2 small children, his wife and his daughters. He had just received it in the last mail delivery. He was showing it to the man next to him, telling him their names." The investigator waited. Vogel said, "The fire order came while I was watching him do this. I looked at the coordinates. I thought about the men at those coordinates, whether they also had photographs, whether they were also showing someone the names of their children." He said, "I changed the coordinates, not by much. Enough that the strike would land in an open area and appear to be an error of calibration. Close enough to be credible. Far enough to matter." The investigator said, "You understood you were disobeying a direct order." Vogel said, "Yes." The investigator said, "You understood you could be shot for it." Vogel said, "Yes." The investigator said, "Did you know whose command post you were redirecting the strike away from?" Vogel looked at him. He said, "No. I knew it was American. I did not know whose." The investigator's report went up the chain. It reached the Army historian's office. It reached Patton's former staff. It reached Davenport, who had been Patton's aide. Davenport read the report twice. Then he drove to the hospital where Patton had died 2 years earlier, in December 1945, and sat in the parking lot for a long time. Then he went home and wrote in his journal. He wrote, "George Patton survived the Battle of the Bulge. He was rerouted around a strike by the margin of 4 minutes and a changed phone call. I knew that. I was there. I assumed it was luck. The kind of luck that saved men every day in that war." He wrote, "It was not luck. It was a German artillery sergeant who looked at a photograph of someone else's children and decided he could not do it." He paused. He wrote, "Patton never knew. He died not knowing. He spent the last year of his life convinced that what happened that afternoon was a minor logistical coincidence." He set the pen down. Then he picked it up again. He wrote, "I have been trying to decide what I think about this, whether it changes anything, whether Patton's legacy is different because a German conscript with a conscience stood between him and a shell in December 1944. He wrote, "I think the honest answer is yes. Everything that happened after December 1944 happened because of what Vogel did. Every decision, every battle, every outcome. The pivot to Bastogne, the relief of the encircled units, all of it. One man with a photograph of someone else's children changed the coordinates by enough." He closed the journal. He did not write in it again for 2 weeks. The question of what to do with the information went through several levels of command. Patton was dead. He could not be told. His family could be told, but the decision about whether to tell them was not simple. The war had been over for 2 years. The information had no tactical value. Its only value was human. Someone decided to pursue it anyway. Colonel Frank Briggs, who had served under Patton and was now working in the Army Historical Division, was assigned to write a summary report of the finding. He also made a decision that was not part of his assignment. He drove to Leipzig. He sat across from Heinrich Vogel in the small accounting office and told him what he had found. He told him whose command post the coordinates had pointed to. He told him that the man he had not killed was General George S. Patton. He told him that Patton had died a year later in a car accident in December 1945. Vogel listened to all of this without speaking. When Briggs finished, Vogel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I did not know who it was. I want you to understand that. It was not a decision about a general. It was a decision about men who might have photographs in their pockets. That is all it was." Briggs said, "I understand." Vogel said, "Does it matter that I didn't know?" Briggs thought about that. Then he said, "I think it might matter more that you didn't know. If you had known, the decision would have been about a general. Because you didn't know, the decision was about something else." Vogel said, "What was it about?" Briggs said, "About whether you could look at a set of coordinates and not think about what was at them." Vogel said, "I could not do that, not that day. I looked at those coordinates and I thought about the photograph. I thought somewhere in that position there are men with photographs. And I could not send the shell." Briggs said nothing. Vogel said, "Is this information going to be published?" Briggs said, "I don't know yet. That decision is above me." Vogel said, "If it is published, I want people to understand something. I was not a hero. I was a man who had a bad morning and a worse conscience and a private with a photograph sitting next to me at exactly the wrong moment. The timing was everything. On a different morning, I might have sent the shell without looking at the coordinates at all." He paused. He said, "I think about that. The version of December 14th where the private had already gone, where I received the order and executed it without looking up. That version exists. I am only in this version because of a 17-year-old carrying messages who stopped to eat his lunch next to my position. Briggs wrote all of this down. He wrote in his report, "Vogel does not present himself as a man of unusual conscience. He presents himself as a man whose conscience was activated at the right moment by the right coincidence. He may be understating himself. He may be accurate. I cannot determine which." He wrote, "What I can determine is this. On December 14, 1944, Heinrich Vogel had a legitimate military order, the means to execute it, and the choice not to. He chose not to. The reason he chose not to was a photograph he never saw again and a private whose name he never knew." He wrote, "Patton never learned any of this. He died believing that afternoon was a rerouting and a phone call and nothing else. He never knew there was a man in a German artillery position who looked at coordinates and thought about photographs and changed the numbers." He paused. He wrote, "I find I keep coming back to one thing. Vogel said the timing was everything, that on a different morning he might have sent the shell. I believe him. And I think that is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 2 years of historical investigation." The greatest events of this war turned on moments that had no right to be decisive. A photograph, a lunch break, a 17-year-old sitting down in the wrong place at the right time. That is not heroism. That is not strategy. That is just how the world works sometimes if you are lucky enough to be standing in the right version of the morning. The report was filed and classified. It remained classified for 22 years. When it was partially declassified in 1969, a military historian wrote a short paper about it. He included Vogel's statement. He titled the paper with a single line from Vogel's interview. The line was, "I looked at the coordinates and I thought about the photograph. The paper was read by perhaps 200 people. It did not attract wide attention. The war was 25 years gone and the world had moved on." But Davenport, who was 71 years old by then, read it. He read it twice, he put it down, he picked it up and read the line again. "I looked at the coordinates and I thought about the photograph." He sat with that for a long time. Then he wrote the last entry in the journal he had kept since 1943. He wrote, "I served George Patton for 2 years. I watched him make decisions that moved armies. I watched him be brilliant and terrible and humane and cruel. I believed for a long time that the war was won by the size of the decisions, the pivots, the strategies, the audacity." He wrote, "I think now that I was wrong. I think the war was won in part by a man I never met, in a battery position I never visited, who received an order and looked up from his work for 1 second and thought about something human." He wrote, "I don't know how you account for that. I don't know how you put it in a history." He wrote, "Maybe you just tell it and let it sit there." A mathematics teacher with a conscience and bad timing and a private eating lunch. One version of December 14th instead of another. He wrote, "Patton would have hated this story. He would have hated owing his life to a coincidence. He believed in will and force and the power of a commander to shape events." He wrote, "But he also might have understood it. Because at the end, after everything, he knew as well as anyone that wars are not decided by generals alone. They are decided by the 1,000 small choices of 10,000 ordinary men. Most of those choices are lost. Some of them survive in archives." He wrote, "This one survived." He wrote, "I am glad it did." What would you have done in Vogel's position? If you had received that order, would you have looked up from the coordinates? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more World War II stories, the ones history almost missed entirely, make sure you subscribe.